And in the meantime, taking your calls for the next, just under 30 minutes or so. From Tindall, Gask, Bentley, Jane Miller, family lawyer, is here. Hi, Jane. How are you?
Hi, Matthew. Good morning.
Nice to have you in. And as you said during the break, to fill-ins here, both you and me, for Leon, and you're here for Tony Kerrin, who's normally here at this time. But, of course, family issues. And we were talking during the break. I mean, it must get a bit draining getting into all that personal stuff in court, surely.
I think that's right. I think the practice of family law is a really interesting one because family law touches people's personal lives. It goes straight to the heart of the home and children and parenting matters. And it's very emotive for the people that are going through that process because they're having the legal system touch what's happening in their home life.
Indeed. Earlier on in the week when I was filling in for Leon, Alex Ward was here co-hosting. He's, of course, a former president of the Law Society, lawyer about town, etc. And we got onto the Summary Offences Act and saw in there that bigamy is an offence in South Australia, and that led to a question which we discussed off air. Actually, we didn't get to this on air, but for people who might be married and that ends perhaps amicably, as it does in some cases, and they go their separate ways, but never actually finalise that with a divorce, and then one or the other or both take up with new partners who become de factos, and that's a 2-year relationship now, isn't it?
Yes,
2 years where you
that's correct.
cemented in law as a de facto. Are they effectively bigamists?
Well, from a legal perspective, they're not. I mean, they're not going to get in trouble with the law for that. But it really does highlight some interesting issues where we look at marriages that haven't ended with a divorce, and yet they still might have unresolved property settlements, and then people go on and start new financial affairs with a new partner, with a de facto partner. And that's all well and good until perhaps that relationship falls apart as well, and then there's a big mess.
Wow, so they all go in for the kill, so to speak.
That's right. You could technically have a case in the family court where you've got all of those interested parties fighting it out over a particular asset pool.
Gee, amazing. 8223 is the number. We're talking family law with family lawyer Jane Miller from Tindall, Gask, Bentley, and Peter has called in 8223 Hi, Peter.
Hi, Leon. No, sorry.
Matthew, Matthew and Jane.
Hey, Matthew and Jane, sorry about that. I haven't got a great deal of confidence in the family law court based on I'm tied up with grandparents for grandchildren. I've seen people in there, grandparents looking after their grandchildren and fighting it in court to try and get custody. They've lost their houses, that sort of thing, and to try and look after their grandchildren and fight it in court. In my case, I've actually been through the court. I had a 6-day trial. I had 12 months of having to put up with allegations made against me for sexual abuse against my granddaughter, which were dismissed on the eve of trial. We had to represent ourselves because we couldn't afford the $30,000 to have for somebody to represent us in trial. Then we eventually won, walked away, and now the other party, he's trying to start again through a separate court in Darwin, going through the whole process, and we're back where we started from. And it eventually got thrown out anyway. But at the end of the day, you know, this guy's contravened 20 times and the court does not fine him or do something about it. I mean, from my point of view, the family court's a joke.
Can that situation, Jane, be addressed? I mean, can someone continue to go through different courts, different jurisdictions to try and get somewhere?
We certainly have a federal jurisdiction for this type of matter, so there's different court registries across Australia. But with parenting matters or matters with grandparents, anything concerning a child, yes, there can be further litigation about that issue. So you might go through a situation like Peter's described where you have a trial and an outcome and then find you either have problems with the enforcement of that court order, or alternatively the situation might change for that child and the order is no longer really appropriate for that child's needs. So those two issues give people an opportunity to bring the matter back to court. And unfortunately what you do see sometimes is people might try to abuse that situation and bring matters back to court unnecessarily, which is obviously very distressing for the people on the other side. It's distressing for the children that are stuck with this continuing litigation, and it's expensive for the taxpayer to fund.
So the taxpayer picks this up?
Well, at least the administration costs of the court are very expensive to run a court, and the court is there really just trying to apply legal solutions to what are really social problems. And I think that highlights where family law does become a motive, and people are often very unsatisfied with the result in a family law matter, but it's a very difficult job for the court to do, and I don't envy that position at
you
all.
need the wisdom of Solomon, don't you? Amicable divorces, what do people need to know from a legal perspective, even if they're on good terms with the ex?
Well, I think it's important to know that the amicable settlement is the priority. If you can achieve that, that's fantastic. You should aim for that. But even if you're aiming for an amicable divorce, I think it's important for people to still understand what their full rights and their obligations are. Sometimes people are so keen to keep it amicable that they never actually go and make an inquiry about what their entitlements are and what that they should do to perhaps protect themselves if it's not amicable at some point in the future. So in the work that lawyers do is we're often meet with people and provide advice from the sidelines, really, so that they can then go and negotiate with their former partner or spouse to come up with a settlement, and then they come back to us just to put in place the structure so that that arrangement's binding. And I think that that's a problem that a lot of people have, in that they don't take those steps, so they might give up an entitlement they don't even know that they have, or that they might not put an arrangement in place so it's binding, and then they can't enforce it down the track.
Do you have couples who start off amicably and then it doesn't finish quite that way?
Absolutely. Look, I think, Matthew, for most people would like it to be amicable, so yes, that's the case. And sometimes during the negotiation process, other factors come up. Perhaps someone repartners, or the way a parenting matter's going might not be so well, or someone comes into some money by an inheritance, or a lot. There's things that change, and yes, unfortunately, when family law matters aren't amicable, they can actually be very, very ugly.
Oh, human nature is fascinating. Let's go to Sam on a mobile phone. 8223 0000 is the number if you want to have a chat with Jane. Hi, Sam.
Yeah, g'day. Thank you for taking the call. Just wanted to find out, I have a friend of mine who is going through a separation and been separated for over 12 months. There's a couple of kiddies involved. But the ex-partner, the male, he continually calls, texts, wants to know what's going on, who they're with, where they are. And there's been instances where there's been 15, 16 phone messages or calls in a particular day or night.
Sure.
I just wanted to find out what ramifications what legalities are involved there, because as far as I'm concerned for this person, to me it's paramount to stalking.
Absolutely, and that situation's, I'm afraid, not uncommon. And the reason for that, I think sometimes people have trouble letting go when a relationship has ended, and that would be very hard for your friend to move forward with her life if she's continuing to receive that level of communication. And it certainly exceeds, it seems like it exceeds just general concern from the children's perspective. It is an intrusion into your friend's life. So there are steps that your friend might want to consider. Contacting the police is one of them to see whether she might be entitled to an intervention order to put some restraint on that behaviour. That can be quite inflammatory in certain circumstances, so that might be a little bit of a last resort. There might be other steps she can take to perhaps try and stop the behaviour beforehand, as far as giving him warnings. There's also steps that can be taken through the family court if they're involved in any litigation there about the parenting of the children. The family court can actually put in place some restraints on the level of communication and contact and the format of that communication.
Right.
And I think we have quite progressive definitions nowadays of stalking and family violence and that sort of conduct, so that it's quite well recognised, I think, that if that behaviour intimidates somebody or is intended to threaten them, that could actually have a consequence of being seen as almost a form of violence.
Okay.
Jane, just on some of that, before you go, Sam, what level of enforcement does the court have if it says, for instance, look, you limit phone calls to no more than one a day, for argument's sake, just to have a chat with the kids before they go to bed or whatever the case may be, and the guy continues to ring 5, 6, 10, whatever, or the lady for that matter. What can be done? Take the phone away?
Yeah. Well, look, if that order is made through the family court that puts that restriction on the amount of time, the family court have a process of enforcing its orders, which often involve sort of, I guess, helping that person by way of understanding what the children's needs are through parenting courses and the like. But probably in that situation, it's more appropriate then to take it to the next level, which is ask for the South Australian Police to intervene and possibly put in place an intervention order, because if that is broken and an order is made that's only one phone call a day, if the calls persist, well, then you can actually be arrested for breaching that order. So it can escalate very quickly once you've got that order in place.
Okay, interesting. Well, that's where it gets very messy, obviously. And with me in the studio at 13 to 12 is Jane Miller, Tindall, Gask, Bentley, family lawyer, and she's here happy to take your calls on family law and related issues. Busy time at the moment, Jane? Oh, sorry, there we go.
Yes, it is a busy time, Matthew. I must say the last few years since we had the financial downturn, we have noticed a far greater demand for family law services, which I think just is an indication of the strain that couples are going through with household finances. And we've also noticed that we've touching more people as far as the jurisdiction getting wider. So we now have in South Australia a definition of de facto couples, which is a cohabitation of 2 years or more, or they have a child together, whereas it used to be 3 years. And now same-sex couples are also caught under the same umbrella of that legislation.
Right. So now same-sex couples, obviously very topical with marriage as the debating point, but the other side of that is obviously the separation. Many relationships will have been obviously exceeding 2 years. So you're starting to see, and probably for a long time, I would imagine, gay couples coming to you now and looking to separate.
Absolutely, yes. So we need to help them with property settlement matters, as well as any matters relating to children that they might have of that relationship. So basically that they're treated exactly the same as a married couple, other than the fact they don't need to have a divorce when the relationship ends because they weren't married in the first place.
That takes me back to the first question I asked you about divorced couples then in de facto relationships and the nature of that relationship. I guess with de factos breaking up, if you've never been married and then start a new relationship, another de facto relationship or another marriage, I mean, there's nothing to consider, is there? It's just one ends, the other one starts, unlike the need for a divorce.
Other than property settlement matters and any children they might have, then no, there's no formality of actually having to go to court and become unmarried by a divorce, but they still need to go through the processes of sorting out their finances. And that's the case even if the couple have kept all of their property separate and their income separate.
Really?
If they've lived together for more than 2 years or had a child together, then they are entitled to a property settlement and claim against each other's assets.
Wow.
And that covers superannuation as well, which I think a lot of people don't realise.
And that's a recent thing, isn't it, the super?
Yeah, that's only been in the last decade that we've seen that introduced.
As far as the law concerned, is de facto any different to marriage now?
No, it's not. No, not at all.
Okay. Finalising a divorce, things like property settlement, as you've been saying, and parenting arrangements, how's all that negotiated?
Well, what we often do is we give people advice very early on so that they know what their rights and entitlements are. There's normally a process of having to find out more information. For example, with a property settlement, you might not know what your spouse's superannuation is worth, so we find that information out. We help people negotiate. If it's a parenting matter, they might involve a counsellor to do something called family dispute resolution, where they try to nut it out in an amicable way.
Yep.
And failing at all working out by agreement, then they head to the family law courts and ask the court to make a decision for them on those specific issues. The divorce is actually handled quite separately to that process, which I think most people sort of understand that a divorce means property settlement and parenting matters. That's not actually the case. The divorce is actually probably the most simple part of the whole process. That's just the matter of becoming unmarried. Lots of people do that without a lawyer, just in order to save costs. It's quite straightforward. You can get a kit on the court website. If you don't have children, you can actually fill it out on the website, pay by credit card for your filing fee, and then you don't even have to actually go to court for the hearing if there's no children. So that process can be really quite simple. So it's normally the property settlement and the parenting matters where people need a lot more thought and consideration and help.
And counselling is interesting because obviously that comes at a cost as well. So it all kind of adds up, doesn't it, long term, when you think about everything that you need to do?
Absolutely. It can be a very stressful time for people's finances because they've normally gone from one household with a particular income and then they have to use that same income to support two households. And plus, that's right, there's the costs of the actual divorce, the counselling, and just really putting people's lives back on track.
So it's interesting, many people coming to you as a result of the global financial crisis and finances being the problem, well, they're not going to find it any easier, with all due respect to your profession.
No, that's right. Look, it is a challenging time, and I think that's right. I think people do find it very hard to move on after a divorce and set themselves up again. I mean, just even if you imagine that you've got one household full of furniture and you split that between two people in a particular way, well, they have to go out and buy a lot of new equipment. And
do you ever feel like saying to people, what are you doing? Have you thought about this?
Well, look,
Sure they have.
yeah, look, at times we have those sorts of conversations, but
Yep.
normally, people, by the time they get to see a lawyer, they're normally pretty certain the separation is going to happen. Although, having said that, we do actually see a number of clients each year that think a separation might happen, but they're still in a relationship at that time. And we have to provide a great deal of discretion when handling those matters, because it's important that their spouses don't know that they've come to see us.
Yes.
And those people are just doing a little bit of forward planning. And sometimes they want to instigate the separation, or sometimes they're fearful that their partner might be leaving them, and they want to be on top of all of the issues if that moment arises.
Gosh. When a couple is separating, what urgent advice do you give them? And I'm thinking things like the family home, for instance, or kids. I mean, do you if they come looking for that advice, whether it's early on or they both turn up at the office saying that'll do?
Yeah, look, I mean, that's quite an important point, because it highlights why it's beneficial for people to get advice either just before or at the time of separation. Couples often don't know who should stay in the family home, who should leave, whether one person can force the other one out. So we always have to look at whose name is on the title of the property at that time. Sometimes people are locked out their home by their spouses, and the locksmith comes in and changes the locks.
Wow.
Then there's instances about who should actually can take the furniture from the home. And then probably one of the really important things we look at very early on is how are these assets held, and can someone take off with the assets before there's a settlement. And an example of that is you might have $50,000 sitting in a joint bank account. Well, at the moment of separation, there's nothing stopping one of those people going in and clearing out the bank account and going off and having a lovely time. So that's why it's important for people to get that advice early, because they might need to put in place some protective measures to make sure that the asset pool doesn't diminish.
I know it looks like I'm taking notes here. I'm not really. It's, just writing down things you're saying. So if you do have that bank account there and someone does clear it out, can the court, I guess, down the track ask for that money to be returned, order it to be returned?
They can. The court can notionally put that money back into the asset pool, but the problem is if the only asset was the $50,000 and it's all been spent, well, then it's not really going to be an easy task, or possibly one not worth pursuing. So it is well and truly worth putting those measures in place. And it's also really important to make sure that, for me, when I see a client, to make sure that they've got access to appropriate funds as far as income and any capital savings they can, whilst they're going through the negotiation process. Because if one person's got all the income and all the money, then they're in a much stronger bargaining position, because they can sit and wait as long as they like to have this settlement, whereas the person that's living in poor circumstances wants their money straight away, so they might fold very quickly. So you have to even that up and make sure everyone's got a fair share of that income whilst you're waiting for the overall settlement.
Is divorce law in SA, as far as, you practice it, you live it, you breathe it every day, is it fair and equitable, do you think? Does it need to be amended, adjusted in any way?
Look, I actually think that the court does a pretty good job of it, to be honest, and I think the Parliament's given us some good legislation to work with, because it is a really difficult job. It does vary case by case, and consideration needs to be given to everyone's circumstances. And unfortunately, where people are aggrieved by the system, that's normally, with financial matters, that's normally just because there's just not enough money to go around to make sure everyone's well set up for the future. And there is sometimes a misconception that everyone getting 50% is a fair deal, whereas the legislation we've got is more based upon, well, who's put what in and what is each person's needs into the future, with particular consideration given to who's got the care of the children. And so you might see that one person receives 70% and the other one receives 30%. And on the face of it, that sounds unfair, but when you drill down and look at the circumstances of the couple, then that's actually giving everyone what they need. Yeah,
interesting. All right. Jane, fascinating talking with you about that. It's an area that I think a lot of us, well, hopefully people don't have to go down. Certainly I haven't, and I hope never have to, but gee whiz, it's something that's fascinating, and we see it, all the time with cases like that sad case of the 4 girls that you'd probably be aware of. It's in Queensland, I think, at the moment, going to the High Court, where they're appealing not to go to Italy, and their mother or grandmother had them in hiding some months ago, and that's the sort of thing we see, and it just, brings up those terrible images and emotions that you just think of what they must all be going through. But anyway, so be it. If people want to get in touch with you, Jane, is there a number or an email or something?
Yes, our office number is 82121077, and we can be emailed at tgb@tgb.com.au, and we've also got a great website with a lot of information on it, which is tgb.com.au.
Fantastic. Jane Miller, family lawyer at Tindall, Gask, Bentley.